In the Antarctic Ocean, 28 men were on board a ship, but their vessel had become trapped among millions of tons of ice. They had already spent 7 long months stuck in the same spot. Then, one night, they suddenly heard a loud sound from beneath the ship, and the vessel tilted sharply to one side. It felt as if something from below had violently tried to push it upward. What happened next was beyond anything they could have imagined. Viewers, the Antarctic Ocean, where waves rise as high as buildings, winds roar at 100 kilometers per hour, and the water temperature is so low that human blood can freeze. Traveling through these waters is like embracing death itself. Even if you survive the cold and the waves, the colossal icebergs, the size of mountains, have the strength to crush a ship within seconds. But 111 years ago, when technology was not as advanced and ships were nowhere near as strong as today, a group of 28 men found their vessel trapped in this same deadly sea. They endured not weeks, not months, but an astonishing 2 years under the open sky, surrounded only by ice, freezing winds, dwindling food supplies, and no chance of calling for help. This is a survival tale that the world now calls the greatest survival story of all time. Its hero was Sir Ernest Shackleton, an explorer whose mission was to test the endurance of the human body. Fittingly, he named his ship Endurance. Shackleton had undertaken several dangerous expeditions before. In 1901, he had been part of a mission that reached close to Antarctica, but had to turn back 750 kilometers away. In 1907, he tried again, but this time had to retreat just 150 kilometers short. And in 1914, he set out once more, not only determined to reach Antarctica, but also to cross the entire continent on foot. The mission was called the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, and because of its extreme danger, no one wanted to join. Shackleton's first challenge was to recruit a crew. To do this, he wrote an advertisement in the newspaper. But this wasn't an ordinary ad. Its opening line read, "Men wanted for hazardous journey." It clearly stated very low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, and no guarantee of safe return. Shackleton wanted only those who did not fear death. Soon he had gathered a crew of 27 men. He had been planning this expedition for 4 years, but just as the time came closer, the world was plunged into World War I. Everyone thought the mission would be cancelled, but Britain, which had already declared war, gave Shackleton permission to proceed. For such a perilous journey, they needed an extremely strong ship, one that could withstand the ice of the Antarctic seas. Luckily, one such ship already existed. It had been built in Norway for another explorer who wanted to take elite clients polar bear hunting. But that venture had failed. Shackleton bought this ship and renamed it Endurance. The ship was built from thick American oak wood, designed specifically to endure the crushing pressure of the ice. It was a hybrid, equipped with both sails and an engine. Finally, on the 8th of August 1914, Shackleton's long-awaited day arrived. Endurance set sail from Plymouth, England. For 4 months, they traveled through the Atlantic Ocean, first to Argentina, then to South Georgia Island, for final preparations. On the 5th of December 1914, they headed straight into the Antarctic's Weddell Sea. On board were 28 men and 50 large dogs, meant to haul supplies across the ice. For 46 days, the voyage went smoothly, and they were just 1 day away from reaching the Antarctic coast. But on the 18th of January 1915, disaster struck. The ice became thicker and thicker until it reached 18 feet deep. Endurance no longer had the strength to break through. The ice was also too unstable for the men to start their journey on foot. The ship had become trapped, just 130 kilometers short of its destination. At first, they thought it was only a temporary problem, but it turned out to be the expedition's greatest obstacle. They tried everything to free the 300-ton ship, even manually cutting through ice to create a path. For 2 exhausting days, the crew labored nonstop, but managed to move the ship only 300 meters before it was stuck again. After a month of futile effort, Shackleton made a difficult decision on the 14th of February 1915. They would leave the ship to the natural movement of the ice and hope it drifted free as winter ended. The ship now became their winter station. The crew maintained discipline thanks to Shackleton's leadership. They passed the time with discussions, soccer, cooking, and even cutting each other's hair, anything to stay occupied while waiting for the ice to break. But fate had other plans. In April of 1915, the ice began shifting, but instead of clearing a path, it compressed tighter, piling layer upon layer. The crushing force of millions of tons of ice began pressing against Endurance. The crew desperately hacked at the ice, trying to relieve the pressure. For weeks, they managed to keep disaster at bay. Then came the 14th of July, 1915. At night, a deafening crack sounded beneath the ship, and Endurance lurched violently to one side. No one knew what had happened. Was it a whale strike or something else? By morning, they discovered the truth. The ice had not only tilted the ship, but also shattered its rudder. 7 months had now passed with the crew stranded in the frozen wilderness, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest human settlement, with no contact and no hope of outside help. Their only hope was Shackleton. By the 18th of October, 1915, after 9 months stuck, another massive pressure wave slammed the ice, tilting the ship 30 degrees in an instant. Cracks opened and water began flooding in. The men worked tirelessly through the night to keep the ship afloat. But Shackleton realized their shelter was doomed. On the 27th of October, 1915, he gave the order to abandon ship. They hauled out whatever they could, supplies, food, lifeboats, and even their dogs, onto the open ice. The ship that had been their home for months was slowly crushed beneath the relentless ice and finally sank. Now, with no shelter, their only chance of survival was to move. Shackleton decided to aim for Paulet Island, 550 kilometers away, where there might be an old supply depot. But reaching it with only 3 lifeboats was nearly impossible. The very ice that destroyed Endurance could smash their small boats in seconds. Still, they tried, dragging the boats across the shifting ice. For 6 long months, they camped on drifting ice floes, sometimes falling into cracks, sometimes carried by currents. Shackleton realized the floes were drifting toward land and decided to wait, floating with them. But food was running out. They hunted penguins and seals whenever they could. By February 1916, 13 months into the ordeal, they were surviving on a single biscuit per day. Eventually, they were forced to kill their dogs for food. By April 1916, after storms, frostbite, and unimaginable suffering, they finally reached Elephant Island. For the first time in 16 months, they stood on a solid land. But the island was barren, no hope of survival long term. Their only chance was South Georgia Island, 1,300 kilometers away. On the 24th of April, 1916, Shackleton and 5 men set out in a lifeboat on what seemed like a suicide mission. The seas were monstrous, waves 90 feet high, temperatures plunging to minus 20 degrees Celsius, their bodies freezing. With no GPS or proper compass, they navigated only by the sun and stars. Each day, despite giving their all, they could cover barely 80 kilometers. After 16 agonizing days, on the 10th of May 1916, they finally reached South Georgia Island, but on the wrong side, facing mountains 4,000 feet high. For 36 hours straight, Shackleton and his men climbed over those peaks. When they finally stumbled into the whaling station on the other side, they were so unrecognizable that no one believed they were the same men who had set out nearly 2 years earlier. 3 days later, Shackleton set out again, this time to rescue the men he had left behind. After several failed attempts, he finally succeeded. On the 30th of August 1916, Shackleton returned to Elephant Island. He didn't know how many of his men were still alive, but to his astonishment, all 22 men were alive and safe. Shackleton had departed England on the 8th of August 1914. 2 years and 22 days later, he returned, not having completed his original mission, but having achieved something far greater, bringing every single one of his men home alive. Though Shackleton never reached the South Pole, his survival story earned him legendary status. Over a century later, in 2022, the wreck of Endurance was finally discovered on the Antarctic seabed, preserved in perfect condition 3,000 meters below, so intact that even the ship's name can still be read. And that, viewers, is why this tale is remembered as the greatest survival story of all time.